This podcast is brought to you by ProLongevity, the award-winning 8-week program that can transform the lives of people with prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, and many other lifestyle-related illnesses. Founded by Phillips, the pharmacist who gave up drugs.
Hi, and welcome to the ProLongevity podcast. I have with me today Warren Matthews, who I first came across through my friend Ivor Cummins. And you would have seen Ivor's appeared on my podcast, I've appeared on Ivor's, and so has Warren. Now, as you know, I call myself the pharmacist that gave up drugs. And I certainly don't call myself the pharmacist who gave up drugs and then filled people with expensive, unnecessary supplements. ProLongevity gets approaches all the time from supplement companies, and basically their thesis is carry on with your terrible Western diet or sad standard American diet, consume huge quantities of our vastly expensive supplements and you'll be fine. That is the path of the charlatan, and that's certainly not the path that we take. Warren has a very interesting set of supplements, and what's also interesting is that Warren didn't approach us, we approached him. And we approached him on the basis of the evidence and the science, and also the basis of his own journey, which we discovered, as I said, through Ivor. So what I'm going to do is talk to Warren about his own health journey and then explain about the range of supplements, and we're stocking a few of them, and if there's demand we might increase it. But we're confident that this is an ethical approach, and in fact if you look at the evidence, for example, of the 100 trillion statin industry and compare that with some of the things that Warren's offering, I know which way I'd go. So that's a little bit of an intro. Warren, hi, how are you?
Hi there, Graham. How are you today?
Yeah, really good. And
delighted to have this with you. You're in the evening there. You're in nice warm weather there. We're in cold weather here.
You should probably tell the audience where you are and what time of day it is, actually, because we're at opposite ends of the world and opposite times of day as well.
But I'm in New Zealand, in Christchurch, New Zealand, and it's currently about 8:30 in the morning here. And I think it's 9:30 in the evening where you are, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. Absolutely. So I know we haven't officially met, but I kind of feel I know you through, the work I've done with your team as we start to take on board some of your supplements, and obviously through the wonderful Ivor Cummins who brought us together unintentionally, but that's the net result. I thought.
Yes, Ivor's a good. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Carry on.
I'm just going to say Ivor's a good guy, and I got to meet him through. When I was doing research on calcification, because some years ago he ended up with an issue with a calcified aortic valve, and he'd been doing a lot of research on that. And as a result of making contact, with him, I ended up flying over to see him, and then he came over and flew over here to see me over here, and that's what started not only a good business relationship, but also a good friend.
Absolutely. And in fact, that is a great place to start. So perhaps you'd tell us your own health journey, and particularly this issue with the calcification, because I think this is key.
Well, my health has always been great. I'm 75 now, and I've only ever had one issue in my entire life, and that was just a few years ago. Basically, what happened was that it goes back about 24 years ago when I was building ocean-going luxury power catamarans, and I ended up building them in San Diego after I had a factory here in New Zealand. And through some misplaced trust, I ended up getting totally wiped out financially, and I was left stuck in Mexico at the time with just a shirt I have on my back. And I still remember this, sitting on the beach there in a little place I was renting, looking at the sun going down, and figured, well, if I've got to start all over again, I'm going to have to live an extra 20 years because I was about 52 at that time.
Yeah.
And I had one of my sons over there with me at the time, and he had an interest in supplements, and so did I. And that's what started the whole journey. And for the first 18 years, because first of all, I was able to get connected with one of the world's top bioscientists who agreed to do the formulas, for us, and that's what led to the establishment of XtendLife, which was 22 years ago now. And everything's been good. My health has been great. I've had no issues at all up until about 3 years ago, a little over now, about, I think it was early 18. And I started finding I was, excuse me, getting a bit puffed when I was doing some exercise. And I hadn't been doing much exercise. I thought, well, that's only because I haven't been doing enough. I need to do some more. And so when I tried to do some more, it was worse. I thought, well, maybe there's a problem of some sort. And I didn't have a doctor. I hadn't been to a doctor for many years. And so I finally conceded and went and saw a doctor. And then she did some tests, and she said, I think you've got aortic stenosis. And anyway, sent me away for other tests and so forth. And anyway, it was established that I had a calcified aortic valve. All my other markers were good, and always have been, but the valve had obviously calcified. And so when I saw the cardiologist, and he said, look, you're going to have a valve replacement. I said, well, what does that involve? He said, well, open heart surgery. And I said, and he says, you should do that, as soon as. I said, well, maybe hang off for a moment because I reckon I can fix it myself. And so I went away, spent about 3 weeks doing some research and found sort of promising material that looked like it could be reversed or certainly improved, but the problem is, of course, it would take time. Yeah. And so I went back to the cardiologist, and because when I told him I was going to do some research myself, he says, well, he said, you better do it quick. He said, because I reckon that if you don't have this surgery, you'll be dead within a year. And what I sort of found out was that it would probably take 2 to 3 years, to correct it or to improve the situation. So I ended up having open heart surgery and had the valve replaced. And fortunately, it was done in November, and in January I flew out of New Zealand. I had the boat over in Malaysia, and because I was going to be selling it, and I was on my own on the southern part of out at sea, and I actually fell off, and the boat sailed away without me. And, so I gave the heart a good test because I was actually in the water for about half an hour before I managed to attract another vessel who picked me up. Just pure luck and pure chance that vessel happened to be passing. So it sort of probably goes back to the old sort of thing that there's a question when your number's up, it's up, and all sorts of things can happen to you in the meantime. So anyway, as a result of having that surgery and having that problem with the aortic valve, I knew obviously it was a problem, and that calcification would probably continue to develop. And that's when I started doing some really serious research, and that's how I got onto IVA. And then everything went from there. We got our local scientists involved and started researching all the options that there were to try and stop the progression of the calcification. So that was the prime thing there. So in other words, there's been two major components, I suppose, in the last 22 years. One being that of the intention to live an extra 20 years, not in terms of just extra years, but also to be active. The objective for me was, well, I figured that, let's say, for example, most people live to mid-70s. Well, I really need to live to mid-90s. That was the plan.
Well,
And
you fit the ProLongevity profile very well, put it that way. That's kind of the point of the ProLongevity program. And the whole reason I could have called it reverse diabetes or avoid this illness or avoid that illness. But that's precisely the thinking behind ProLongevity, which is, yes, you don't want any of these life-threatening conditions, but also you want to live a long and healthy life, or as they say, die young at a very old age, or whichever metaphor you pick. So absolutely, we get that.
couldn't agree with you more, Graham, because it's rather sad when you see a lot of older people. I see a lot of people around my age that are they're old.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is, I have none of the issues of which other people have, or most other people have my age. I have no aches and pains, no problems whatsoever. Never get the flu. Never get a cold. I haven't had the last time I had the flu was in 2004 when I picked up the original SARS in Asia, and before I was going over to Europe, and but I didn't do anything for that. I ended up locking myself into a hotel for 3 days and then just sweated it out. And I haven't had a flu or a cold since, and I certainly haven't had the jab, and I have no fear of COVID at all. So life's good in that respect, and I think that from a cardiovascular point of view, the CX8, which I've been taking, does appear to be working well in the respect that there's been an improvement in my overall elasticity, measured by, because I get regular tests. I just went over to Thailand a couple of weeks ago to have a whole series of tests and scans because it's such a hassle to get anything in New Zealand, because you've got to go to a doctor who's got to refer you through to a specialist who has to then refer through to this. It goes on for months, whereas over there, you can go and say, look, I want to have a CT angiogram, I want to have this, I want to have that, you can get the whole thing done in a week. So that's what I did, and everything's looking good because I use myself as a bit of a guinea pig, because we've also done another new product called VascuFlow as well, which is to help with normalizing blood pressure. So everything that we've done right from the outset, and I'm going back 22 years, has been done with a selfish motivation in the respect of to meet my objectives, and that is I want to have a situation where I can live as long as practical but be active the entire time. Finally have a situation when it's time to go, that you've got a couple of weeks, where, things are going to shut down. So you've got time to say goodbye, and then, you peg off, and it's, and that's the end. But
what everyone wants is a good life and a good death. And that's what you're describing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's sad when I see people getting loaded up with medications, and they are like the Walking Dead. And that's something that, and like, for example, I said to my family that no matter what happens in the future, I'm never going to go into an aged care facility. I said, you've got full permission to shoot me first, because I couldn't think of anything worse. And the fact is that I reckon that your best years really probably start from 65 plus, because at that stage, you've learned a bit of life. You've experienced some life. You've made most of your mistakes, and hopefully, you're in a situation where financially that you can do some of the things that you want. But I think that should be the best time of your life, and also thinking. When I say thinking, I think that often when people get over 70, they think they're old. And if you think you're old, you're going to be old.
Absolutely.
And I just bought a little airplane, recently. In fact, it will be finished in Czechoslovakia next April, and I'm just arranging, I intend flying it back to New Zealand myself. Which will be, a bit of an exercise, which will be a lot of fun, and so life doesn't have to stop when you get old.
No, I agree. And this kind of third stage of life, and I'm about 10 years younger than you, but it's similar. I'm starting to see my friends developing these long-term conditions, the diabetes, the cardiovascular disease. And I can see that my peers are starting that kind of 20-year decline into old age, and of which the last 10 years is pretty miserable. And I agree with you that it's living, but it's not really a life. And yet the evidence is... Go on.
Yeah, and of course the thing is, I think it's also mental attitude. I tend to look at myself as, when I look in the mirror, that it's not me, it's simply the body I'm getting around in, and that it's like a vehicle. It's got to be properly fueled. And one of the things that people tend to overlook is that as they get older, there's a tendency to maybe eat a bit less. You may not be getting the same level of nutrients out of your food, and you've got to top it up. And for example, in the tests, I did a whole series of blood tests just recently, and I found a few items in there which was a little less than optimal. Most of them are optimal, but some are a bit less. So, okay, need to top it up. Same thing with your car. I mean, if you don't send them for servicing and get it greased and so forth, it's going to stop at some point, isn't it? And people need to look at their bodies the same way.
No, I completely agree.
And this is why I sort of got so involved in the supplements, because it's you just cannot get everything out of just food alone. It's impossible. And so you need a top up, but you don't need to go over the top about it.
What we'll come back to the supplements, because I do want to drill into that in some detail, including the science behind the formulations. But what does your diet look like? How much do you eat? How often do you eat? What does that look like?
One thing which I do now, which I've all my life, when I saw my life, when I was in my younger years, I did have a system where I would have usually do 24-hour fast one day a week, because I don't know whether you remember, you probably remember Paul Bragg.
I don't remember that name.
Yeah, he was an American, one of the sort of fathers of natural, this whole natural movement. And I actually went to a lecture of his. He came out to New Zealand, and that would have been now almost, it would have been 55 years ago. Yeah, about 55 years ago. And he was a great advocate for doing regular fasts, and I did that for many years. Each Monday, I would just drink distilled water, and but then over the years, I then sort of eased back on that, and now I've just resumed it again. But I'm very much a fan for intermittent fasting, and now generally I don't eat breakfast, and I just have a light meal for lunch, and then the dinner, but have it quite early. And that is something which I think is really important, because it does give your body a break.
Yeah,
I do occasionally have, in fact, this week I'm intending to have a 3-day fast, but I don't do that often because it's hard work for the first 2 days.
Yeah.
By the third day, it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
But insofar as food in general, the one thing which I've had, both my wife and I have had for many years, is that we have a philosophy: we don't eat anything out of a packet.
Yeah.
We don't eat anything that's processed. So at this stage, it's I don't have a fixed view in terms of diet, because there's two obviously different areas. There's the low carb keto type diet. There's a carnivore type diet, and which, of course, the keto obviously is what Survivor is very much a fan of. But on the other hand, then we also have a lot to do with Dr. Joel Kahn, who's known as America's heart healthy doctor, and he is a vegan, so he's at the other end of the spectrum. And but I think when it comes to diet, it comes back because I think different body types and different people suit different types of diets. But I think that what's important is that it is food which is non-processed and is natural, whether it be a vegan type diet or whether it be carnivore, as long as in fact that it doesn't come out of a packet and hasn't been processed.
Yeah.
So that's my view on diet.
No, I agree with you about the sort of eat real food. That's very much the philosophy of ProLongevity, and as you probably know, I'm involved with the public health collaboration. And that's certainly our message. So let's talk a bit more about XtendLife and how that came into being, and what the philosophy is, and what the evidence base is behind your products and how you formulate them.
Okay, well, how it came to being is, as I mentioned, that I was wiped out financially, needed to live an extra 20 years, and I thought that this would be the way to go. And of course, we did it quite differently to most. And I was rather fortunate that when things got wiped out for me and I was stuck in the States, I then started doing some research to see if I could do a deal to become a distributor for some supplements. And there was a couple of products there which I was interested in. And then went over to Florida, and there was a company there called Life Extension Foundation, and they had a product which was called Life Extension Mix. And that seemed to me to be the best on the market at that time. I mean, we're talking now about 23 years ago.
Yeah.
And anyway, I got back to New Zealand, and I made some inquiries to a supplier of raw ingredients. And I went and saw him, and I said, "Look, here's a formula which I'm interested in." And I said, "Can you get the raw ingredients for that?" He said, "Yes." He said, "But there's much more to it than just taking a formula and copying it." And he said, "You need to have a proper formulator." And anyway, he put me on to a manufacturer. And then I said the same thing to the manufacturer. And he said, "No." They said, "Look, you really need to have a proper professional formulator."
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, do you know any?" And he said, "Well, as a matter of fact, there's a Professor Dr. Munamal Sharaki happens to be visiting Auckland at the moment, and he would be probably one of the top formulators, biociders in the world." So I made contact, with him, and he was in Auckland, and at that particular stage, as I mentioned, I was totally wiped out, financially. But my wife had some flyby points, which was enough to get me a flight up to Auckland. And so I went up and saw, met Newton. We got on very, very well, and he agreed to do some formulations for us, and and I could pay him on a royalty basis, so I didn't need any money sort of up front.
Yeah.
And so he got underway there, because when I showed him the formula which I was interested in, he just laughed, and he said, "I can do much better than that." And that was the birth of the first generation of Total Balance. And so Munham remained involved with us for, I think it was almost 15 years before he retired. And he was responsible for initiating most of our formulas. And then recently, and then he taught me a lot, because Munham was quite frustrating in a way to deal with, because I'd ask him a question, something which I wanted just a short answer for, and 3 hours later he's still explaining the answer to the question.
Yeah.
And of course, and in those days he must have thought I was so dumb, because it was all above my head. So it took a number of years to really get to understand how he worked things. So that was a very good grounding for me. And then since then, we've used, and like at the moment, we have somebody in our new product development. She's Dr. Amanda Wiggins. She's a PhD in neurology and, does all the research and so forth for us. In other words, whereas I find it, boring going through all the actual medical, reviews and clinical studies and so on. But she loves that stuff. So I now sort of work a bit more on the experience which I've had over the last 22 years, and then she gets into the detail. And we've got others in the team as well. So that's how we do our current new product development. And but one thing which is quite different is that everything that we've actually do is, as I mentioned, is from a selfish point of view, that for myself and my family.
Yeah.
And as a result, all our family is also in great health. And as a result, there's been no compromises. And this is interesting because a lot of people don't realize that there can be major variations between an ingredient of the same name. For example, grape skin extract. We use a special extract which is produced in New Zealand using water extraction, and a normal grape skin, if you go pick it off the vine, has around about 20 actives.
Yeah.
But most of the grape skin extracts that you buy, most of them come from China, only have 4 actives in it. And so we look at all that sort of stuff in terms of, right into the detail of what's actually in it, and has it got all the actives. And it doesn't matter what the price is. Obviously, the price is important, but it doesn't influence the decisions when it comes to the actual formulations. Like, for example, the grape skin extract I mentioned is about 5 times more expensive than the ones which you'll generally find, which particularly from mass manufacturers. And the other thing which was also important to mention is that whereas the first batch of Total Balance we did, it was actually by a contract manufacturer, it wasn't a practical way to do it with 90-odd ingredients in it, and that's when we looked at setting up our own manufacturing operation so we could control it, because most products that are on the market are actually produced by contract manufacturers. And if, for example, that you go to them with a formula, that most people who do that are marketers, and they don't understand the differences that there is in the various ingredients.
Absolutely.
And of course, if a manufacturer is operating under GMP, you've got to validate the supplier of the raw ingredient. You've got to go through all this testing protocol, and it's not practical to do it for specialized ingredients. They normally just take out what they've got out of their own stock. So there's a lot of differences in the respect that we control the whole system from the sourcing of the raw ingredients to the finished product. And as you're probably aware from the videos, that the facility we've got is probably, I'd say it's the best in the southern hemisphere. It's it's really it was a purpose-built, whole purpose-built facility, and we've got everything all under the one roof.
Is your manufacturing also in New Zealand?
Oh, well, yes, we have our own facility. We do all our own manufacturing, and so if in fact that if you go on the website, or you can post a link in here, you'll see a tour of the facility where it takes you right through the whole process. That. Yeah, because it's very, very important because, and it's a bit like that we have sort of special blending methodologies, which is not normal, but it avoids any stratification of the actual raw ingredients. We do it's all validated, so everything is validated from a point of view of our blending protocols. We put markers in blends when we're testing the blending protocol, and then test to see if it's evenly distributed, because we sometimes hear reports that a supplement doesn't contain what is claimed it does.
Yeah.
Now, in a lot of cases, it's not that they haven't put the raw ingredient in, but it's rather their blending protocols, where you don't get a full even distribution of the raw ingredients. So because most people use what they call a ribbon blender, and you can get stratification, whereas we have a special 3D blender, which is quite weird watching. It doesn't have baffles, and it just really mixes it up very well. And then we test each blending protocol and make sure that it is evenly distributed.
Yeah, well, obviously with my pharmacy background, one thing I do know about is drug formulation and the principle. I know we're not talking about drugs as such here, but the principles are the same.
Yes, it is, and very, very important. Just one other point which might be interesting, Graham, that you're obviously familiar with telomeres, the end bits of the chromosomes, and which is an indicator of biological age. I got connected with some other scientists in the US who connected with the lab to do testing for telomeres and for the biological age. Sent some blood samples over for both my wife and myself. Unfortunately, they lost my blood samples, so I got to send another one. But I got the results back from my wife. She's a year younger than me, so she's 74. And the lab was amazed because they said they've never seen it before, such a incredible variation, because her biological age came back at 38.
Can't argue with that.
Yeah. But
you better keep fit. You better keep pretty fit than to keep up with this young lady.
That's right. Yeah. So she's, but mind you, she's been taking Total Balance for almost 22 years now, and I think we've had about 8 or 10 iterations or new generations with it, and so it's quite sort of unique. But then in recent years, a lot of our focus has gone towards cardiovascular, and also we've got another new product coming out shortly, which is for it's the Kiwi Cleanse. We've had our Kiwi Cleanse, which is a special extract of kiwi fruit, but we've actually upgraded the formula further with another new type of extract, also out of kiwi fruit, that is out of gold kiwi fruit instead of green kiwi fruit. And another one, which we're really excited about, is a new pain formula for joints. We've been testing this on people for the last few months, just one capsule a day, and they're getting incredible pain relief. So that's something else which I'll tell you more about later.
Excellent. We'll look forward to the future journey. As you know, we've started off essentially with the cardiovascular range, CX8 being at the centre of it, and vast flow and so on. Because I've got, as you know, a number of clients who've had high or raised CAC scores. And I certainly believe in circumstances such as that, you should throw every available option at it. And let's be very clear, no one here is suggesting carry on with the bad diet or that you can outrun a bad diet. Do everything you can from a dietary perspective. But I think there is a legitimate place for supplementation in certain circumstances.
Well, look, I think so, because even with the best of diet, some of the ingredients, for example, which are in CX8, unlikely you get enough of that in your diet. Now, for example, there's an omega-7 in there, which is interesting. There's nattokinase, which helps with the flow of blood through the the arteries, and there's another one in there which is I'm sure heard of pycnogenol. Well, we've got something in there which is called sinothox, which is actually more potent than pycnogenol, and that helps stimulate stem cells as well. So there's there's some interesting stuff in there which you just don't get.
You don't find that in the standard formulations. Absolutely.
No.
Excellent. Well, is there anything else that we should cover?
Well, I think that we can always do another one later if you wish, Graham. But I think that the important sort of take-home message is, I guess, that as you say, diet and lifestyle, number one.
Yep.
Supplementation, add on to it, and of course, how far you go with supplementation is often really dictated to some extent by costs, because some of these things are not cheap. And I mean, you can. I tend to go overboard a little bit, but then I can. But I think that the basics, as far as I see it from a cardiovascular point of view, is the CXA and the omega-3 premium, because that omega-3 fish oil we have is quite different, because what we've got is, instead of just a normal sorry, he's actually wanted to come and see me.
Hello.
So, hey, Rocky, no, I'm on a call, you see. So
he's not bothered.
If you behave. So the omega-3 premium in particular is really quite a unique product, because what we have done is we've used a blend of natural unconcentrated fish oil from New Zealand, hoki, and then we've combined it with highly concentrated tuna oil with very high in DHA. And what's interesting, we did some tests and found that the combination of the two was actually better from an anti-inflammatory point of view than just the concentrated oil on its own. So rather interesting. Nobody's been able to quite figure that out. I think that when you actually go through a concentration process, you discard a lot of the oil, and there's something in that which is beneficial, which you lose when you concentrate. So we're trying to get the best of both worlds. But also importantly, in that product, we've included ubiquinol, which is the non-oxidized form of CoQ10, which we get from Kanaka in Japan. And that's very important for heart health. And it's rather interesting. We know it works because when I test my CoQ10 levels, they're off the charts. There's a range in the optimal level, and it's above the optimal level. So it certainly it works, but it's very bioavailable. So I just thought I'd mention that too.
No, I think it's important. It's important to know the detail, because that's what is the differentiator. I mean, your range isn't cheap, let's be honest, but it's expensive for a reason.
Yes, well, I think that it's a bit like the ubiquinol, which is very expensive, but it's the genuine, it's the genuine ingredient, where there is knockoffs in China, but I think they're questionable quality. It's a bit like one of the products where one of the ingredients we're using in this new joint formula. We could get it from China and approximately a quarter of the price as to what we can get a branded one. But the branded one, which we're using, has gone through all the testing, because we got a sample of the other one just to check it out, and found that it wasn't really that genuine ingredient which they claimed it to be, because they'll often adulterate it with other things. So we spend a lot of money on testing, and most cases they're fine because we only use we've built up a whole lot of suppliers over the years, and sorry about this. Listen, my wife's not here at the moment, and so he's
demanding
come
attention.
down. He wants to be part of it. Just
nothing wrong with that. This is obviously just a start for us, and we look forward to working, with you and your team going forward as a very much in a partnership. It's the way we like. The whole idea of the ProLongevity program is to work with independent businesses and build an ecosystem of interlocking independent businesses, all with the same intention. So whether it's Dan Grief and the deliciously guilt-free low-carb cakes, or Ali Houston and his ice cream, or you and your supplements, what we ultimately hope is that people can come to us, look at our website, know that the due diligence has been done, and they can pick things that work for their lifestyle. So this is a great addition, I think, to our group, to our offering.
That's great. No, it's been really good. I've enjoyed sort of having a chat with you, Graham.
Good to see you. And I'm sure we'll be in touch in the future. I'm very much hoping. I know you've got plans to come over to UK and possibly meet up with Ivor. So perhaps we'll all get together and chew the cud for a bit. So I look forward to that.
That would be good. Well, I appreciate that, and thank you.
All the best.
If you enjoyed the podcast and want to find out more, join our Wellness and ProLongevity Facebook group. Don't forget to subscribe and follow so you never miss an episode, and maybe share to friends and family who might benefit. Finally, if you think you might need help with diabetes, heart disease, or any of the other diseases we discuss, then book a free consultation with Graham. There's absolutely no charge for this, and we would never put you under any pressure. What do you have to lose? Bye for now, and see you for the next episode.